Midnight at Buckingham Palace. The corridors are silent, the chandeliers dim, and the only sound is the heavy tick of an ancient clock echoing through the marble halls. Then, a flicker of light. A lone figure moves swiftly through the east wing. Not a guard, not a servant. It's Princess Anne, the one member of the royal family who has never feared the truth. She stops before a locked chamber, sealed since Queen Elizabeth's passing. In her hand, a small flashlight trembles. Its beam lands on a velvet box marked with the royal crest. Anne lifts the lid and freezes. The crown inside, the Queen's crown, is a fake. If anyone had the courage to expose such a deception, it would be her. But the question is, who dared to replace it? Would you believe that a royal could swap the most sacred treasure of the monarchy without anyone noticing? And what if that person was none other than Queen Camilla herself, the woman the public once vowed would never wear the crown? Outside, under the pale moon, Anne drives toward Mill House. She pushes open the door, and there, gleaming in the dark, the real crown catches the light. Everything began on the morning of September 27th, 2025. The clock in Buckingham Palace had just struck midnight when Princess Anne found herself alone in the vast silence of the royal vault. The dim light from the chandeliers flickered against the glass cases, casting distorted reflections of crowns, tiaras, and priceless gems. Every shadow seemed to breathe. Every echo carried a secret. The palace was asleep, but Anne was not. She had been restless for weeks, haunted by a sense that something was being concealed from her, something that went beyond ordinary royal discretion. Tonight, she had volunteered for a task few would question, the pre-ceremonial inventory of the crown jewels before the upcoming memorial of Queen Elizabeth II. It was supposed to be routine, respectful, and symbolic. But to Anne, it felt like destiny. Her heels clicked against the marble floor as she moved past rows of locked glass cabinets. The scent of old velvet and polished gold lingered in the air. The vault was more than a treasury. It was the beating heart of the monarchy, a silent witness to centuries of triumphs and betrayals. Anne's gloved hand paused over a glass case marked "The Crown of the Princess of Wales." Her eyes softened for a moment. Catherine's crown had become an emblem of grace and quiet strength, the kind that reminded her of the woman they all lost decades ago, Diana. There was something almost poetic in the way the cycle had continued. One Princess of Wales after another, both adored, both trapped. But tonight, that poetry was interrupted by unease. Anne leaned closer, her reflection merging with the crown's silver frame. The central diamond, the famous Aurora gem, said to glow faintly under moonlight, seemed dull. It lacked its usual brilliance. Its fiery sparkle dimmed into a pale shimmer. She frowned, tapping the glass lightly, as though the fault might be in her own perception. No, it's all beige. It wasn't her imagination. Anne summoned the palace jeweler, an elderly man named Howard, who had served the royal collection for over 30 years. He arrived within minutes, startled by the unexpected summons. "Your Royal Highness," he whispered, bowing slightly. "You requested to see the princess's crown?" Anne nodded, her gaze never leaving the diamond. "Tell me, Howard, does this look as it should?" Howard adjusted his glasses, examined the gem under the soft white light, and after a long silence, his brows drew together. "That's unusual," he murmured. "The cut looks slightly altered. The facets along the edge, they're sharper than before." Anne felt her pulse quicken. "Altered, as in someone tampered with it?" He hesitated. "Not exactly tampered. Perhaps replaced, but such a thing would be impossible without direct authorization. The vault is monitored around the clock." She looked at him, her expression unreadable. "And yet, the diamond isn't the same." Howard's silence was answer enough. Anne dismissed him gently but firmly, her voice low. "Thank you, Howard. Not a word of this to anyone. Not yet." He nodded and left, his footsteps fading into the distance. The princess remained there for a long while, staring at the crown through the glass. It wasn't just the gem. The engravings along the base, the delicate floral motifs that once symbolized unity between England and Wales, now bore subtle differences. The petals were slightly twisted, their symmetry broken. It was the kind of alteration no ordinary eye would ever notice. But Anne noticed everything. Her years in the palace had taught her to read between the lines, to hear what wasn't being said. She knew the scent of secrets as surely as she knew the echo of her mother's footsteps through these same halls. And tonight, Waham, every instinct told her that something or someone had crossed a line. She looked up at the security cameras mounted near the ceiling. Red lights blinked steadily, a symbol of control, or perhaps of deception. "Show me the footage from the last 30 days," she instructed the head of security the next morning. The man hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "I'm afraid that will require authorization from His Majesty." Anne's tone was calm, but the steel beneath it was unmistakable. "Then consider this my authorization." Hours later, she sat in a small surveillance room buried deep within the palace. Screens flickered with grainy black and white images, guards changing shifts, cleaners polishing railings, endless corridors of silence. Then, at precisely 2:17 a.m., on September 14th, one frame caught her attention. A figure cloaked in dark clothing, moving with unsettling precision, entered the restricted vault area. The cameras recorded no sound, but the timing matched the night Catherine's crown had last been handled for display. The intruder's face was obscured beneath a hood, but the way they moved, steady, deliberate, sent a chill down Anne's spine. She rewound the footage again and again. At one point, the figure turned slightly toward the camera, revealing a gloved hand with a distinctive gold ring, the kind worn only by members of the royal household. Anne's throat tightened. This was no outside thief. Whoever had done this was one of them. She leaned back in her chair, eyes cold and unblinking. The hum of the monitors filled the silence as realization settled like frost. In the world outside, morning light began to creep across the palace lawns. But for Anne, the night had only just begun. The truth, she knew, was far darker than any rumor the tabloids could invent. And as she rose from her seat, the words formed quietly in her mind on, a whisper meant only for herself. The walls may keep secrets, but not forever. For the next 48 hours, Princess Anne spoke to no one about what she had seen. Not to her brother, not to the palace jeweler, not even to her private secretary. The discovery gnawed at her quietly, a splinter under the skin that refused to fade. She had lived long enough inside Buckingham Palace to understand one simple truth. Sometimes the real danger came not from the outside world, but from within the gilded walls themselves. That night, as rain lashed against the palace windows, Anne sat in her study with the file of the royal inventory spread open before her. Every item was accounted for, every crown, every brooch, every heirloom, all documented with precision. Yet one small note caught her attention. Verification of the Princess of Wales's crown pending additional confirmation. It was subtle, bureaucratic even, but to Anne it read like a warning. The next morning she made a single phone call. "I need a team," she said. "No press, no palace oversight, experts only, ones who owe loyalty to truth, not to the crown." Within 24 hours, 3 people arrived under discreet arrangements. A gemologist from the British Museum, an art restorer who had once catalogued Elizabeth II's personal collection, and a historian specializing in royal artifacts. All 3 signed non-disclosure agreements under the title Private Heritage Audit. None of them knew that their true employer was the Princess Royal herself. They met in a secluded chamber beneath the east wing of Buckingham Palace, a place few even remembered existed. Dust hung thick in the air, and the faint hum of dehumidifiers echoed through the vault-like room. Anne stood before them, arms crossed, her voice calm but sharp. "You'll be examining one object only," she said. "The crown of the Princess of Wales. Compare it to every archived image, every diagram, and every record from my mother's era. No detail is too small. If there's even a fraction of a difference, I want to know." The experts exchanged wary glances, but her tone left no room for debate. For hours, they worked in silence, magnifying lenses over their eyes, comparing microscopic engravings, checking refractive indices of gemstones. Anne observed from a distance, her gaze steady, her mind replaying every memory of her mother's collection. She remembered the way Elizabeth had once held that crown, describing it as a bridge between generations. Now that bridge seemed broken. By late afternoon, the gemologist removed his glasses, exhaling slowly. "Your Royal Highness," she said, voice hesitant. This, this isn't the same crown." Anne's eyes narrowed. "Explain." He pointed toward the diagrams projected on the wall. "The diamond's cut is entirely different. The Aurora gem was an antique, brilliant cut, 24 facets, highly distinctive. This one has 26. Someone tried to mimic the pattern, but it's not authentic. The light refraction is off, the color saturation too. This isn't a restoration, it's a replacement." The historian spoke next, flipping through a bound copy of original blueprints from the Royal Collection archives. "There's more. The lower band used to bear a Latin inscription, Virtus et Fides, engraved during your mother's reign. But this piece reads Fides et Gratia. The words are similar, but the meaning isn't. Someone rebuilt this with deliberate precision, yet left traces of alteration." Anne said nothing for several moments. The air in the room seemed to tighten around her. "So the real crown?" she asked finally, her voice a whisper. "Where is it?" The art restorer handed her a faded archival document, a transfer record signed nearly 6 months earlier. At the bottom, in small cursive handwriting, was a line that froze Anne in place. "Item temporarily relocated to Raymill House upon special preservation request." For a brief moment, she simply stared at the paper. Then, almost inaudibly, she repeated the words, Raymill House. Her heart sank. She knew that address all too well. It wasn't an official storage site. It wasn't even part of the royal estate. It was Camilla's private residence in Wiltshire, far from the oversight of palace staff. Anne felt a pulse of disbelief, and then anger. "Who authorized this?" she demanded. The historian looked uneasy. "There's no formal approval signature. Your Royal Highness, the document appears incomplete. The transfer request was initiated, but the line for royal approval was left blank." Blank! That was worse than a forgery. It meant someone had relied on access, not permission. Anne closed the file, her movements precise but rigid. "You've all done enough. No one outside this room hears a word of this. Destroy the working copies, but keep the data encrypted. I'll take it from here." As the experts quietly packed their equipment, Anne stood by the narrow window, staring out into the fading daylight. In the distance, the lights of London shimmered faintly through the drizzle, elegant, indifferent, eternal. She thought of her mother, of the way Elizabeth II had once warned her. The crown is not merely worn, and it is guarded, often against those closest to it. Now those words echoed like prophecy. When the chamber was empty, Anne took the single sheet of paper marked Raymill House and slipped it into her coat pocket. The name alone felt heavy, almost radioactive. She had always regarded Camilla with restrained civility, but never trust. And now the notion that the queen consort might be connected to the disappearance of a royal artifact, it bordered on unthinkable. Yet the evidence pointed straight to her doorstep. That night, Anne returned to her private quarters and locked the door. On her desk lay the copy of the surveillance footage she had reviewed days earlier, the shadowy figure entering the vault. She paused the frame on the gloved hand with the gold ring. Slowly, she zoomed in. There, beneath the flicker of the security light, was a small, intricate engraving on the ring, a crest belonging to the Duchess of Cornwall's household. Anne leaned back in her chair. The room felt suddenly smaller, colder. Her instincts had been right from the beginning. Something inside the palace was rotten, and it led straight to Mill House. Outside, the rain had stopped. The moon broke through the clouds, spilling pale light over the palace courtyard. It was the same light that had once glinted off the real Aurora gem. Anne's expression hardened. Tomorrow, she would leave Buckingham Palace under the guise of a private visit, but her true destination would remain a secret known only to her. Because now the investigation was no longer about a missing crown. It was about betrayal. And the path to truth, no matter how dangerous, was leading her straight to Camilla. Mill House, the Queen's private sanctuary, had just become the epicenter of royal suspicion. The night was heavy with fog when Princess Anne's car slipped quietly out of the palace gates. No escorts, no royal motorcade, just two of her most trusted aides in a plain black sedan, driving toward the Wiltshire countryside. The rhythmic hum of the tires on the wet road was the only sound that broke the silence, as the moon hung low over the fields, pale and watchful. Anne had made her decision hours earlier. After examining the royal archives herself, every instinct told her that something was wrong with the crown, and if the record marked Mill House meant what she thought it did, then the truth was hiding behind the walls of Camilla's private estate. When they reached the long, winding drive that led to Mill House, the air seemed to grow colder. The grand country home loomed ahead, stone walls bathed in dim amber light, ivy curling around the windows like veins. It was nearly midnight, yet one of the rooms upstairs still glowed faintly. Anne's heart tightened. That room, she knew, was Camilla's private jewelry chamber. "Wait here, Vane," Anne whispered to her driver, pulling the hood of her coat up. Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly. She had lived her entire life in the service of the crown, guarding its dignity with the discipline of a soldier. Yet tonight she was acting like a spy, against her own family. The gravel crunched softly under her boots as she approached a side entrance she remembered from years ago. The back door was locked, but the latch on the conservatory window wasn't. She slipped inside, the faint scent of roses mixing with polish and candle wax. Her footsteps echoed against the marble floor as she crept through the hallways. Upstairs, a thin band of light spilled from the door of the jewelry room. Anne moved closer, her breath shallow. She pressed one gloved hand against the cold wood and peered through the narrow crack. Inside, Camilla stood by a long, velvet-covered table. Her hair was pinned up, her posture tense. Across from her was a man in a dark vest, an expert jeweler Anne vaguely recognized from London society events. On the table between them lay a glittering object that caught the light in small, trembling flashes. Anne's heart stopped. It was the real crown, the one that had belonged to Queen Elizabeth II. Camilla spoke first, her tone low but sharp. "Not a word of this leaves this room," she said. "Do you understand?" The jeweler nodded, polishing the crown's central diamond with a precision cloth. "Your Majesty, I've never seen craftsmanship like this. But if I may ask, why alter it? It's perfect as it is." Camilla's expression hardened. "Perfection," she said coldly, "is a matter of perception. Some symbols must evolve, others must disappear." Anne's breath caught in her throat. Disappear. The word echoed in her mind. The crown's central diamond, the same stone that had dulled in the replica, was glowing now, pure and brilliant. It hadn't faded at all. Camilla had switched it. The realization hit her like a wave of ice. For a brief moment, Anne felt dizzy, gripping the wall to steady herself. This wasn't just vanity. It wasn't about aesthetics or personal taste. It was an act of quiet theft and manipulation of royal heritage itself. The jeweler placed the crown gently back on the table. "Shall I return the imitation to the palace tomorrow?" he asked. Camilla gave a curt nod. "Yes, make sure the replacement looks untouched. No one must suspect. Not Charles, not the courtiers, not even Catherine." Anne's pulse roared in her ears. Catherine, the crown meant for her, the symbol of the next generation, was a fake. And here was Camilla, the queen consort, ensuring that no one would ever know. A floorboard creaked beneath Anne's feet. She froze. Inside, Camilla's head snapped toward the door. For one terrible second, Anne thought their eyes might meet through the narrow opening. But Camilla turned back to the jeweler. Her suspicion fading, Anne exhaled silently, retreating a few steps down the hall. Her mind was racing. Every part of her wanted to burst in, to confront the woman who had already taken so much from her family. But she stopped herself. The time wasn't right. This was bigger than a scandal. It was evidence. She reached into her coat pocket and clicked a small recording device her aide had handed her earlier, letting it capture the final exchanges through the door. When the jeweler finally packed his tools and left, Camilla lingered alone in the room. Anne watched as the queen consort lifted the crown in her hands, gazing at it in the mirror. Her reflection stared back, regal, composed, and coldly satisfied. For a moment, Camilla whispered something too faint to catch. Then she placed the crown in a velvet-lined chest and locked it. The sound of the key turning was soft, deliberate, final. Anne slipped out of the house as quietly as she had entered. The night air hit her face, cold and sharp, but her mind was burning. Every step back toward the car felt heavier. She didn't speak a word during the long drive to London. The two aides exchanged uneasy glances, sensing the storm brewing in her silence. When the car finally stopped at the palace gates, Anne looked out at the faint glow of Buckingham's windows. Somewhere inside, her brother slept, completely unaware that the woman beside him was rewriting the symbols of their family's legacy. As the clock struck 2, she finally broke her silence, murmuring almost to herself, "Ray Millhouse, that's where it all began." The chauffeur hesitated. "Your Royal Highness?" Anne didn't answer. Her eyes stayed fixed on the horizon, distant and cold. The truth she had witnessed that night was too heavy for words. The silence inside Ray Millhouse was suffocating. The chandelier above flickered weakly, throwing pale light across the polished marble floor. The scent of velvet, perfume, and cold metal still lingered in the air. Anne stepped forward, her boots echoing sharply with every stride. Camilla froze, her gloved hand still resting on the gleaming crown. Anne's voice cut through the room like a blade. "The thing you're holding doesn't belong to you." Camilla's shoulders stiffened, but she didn't turn immediately. For a brief second, her reflection in the glass cabinet betrayed a flicker of fear. Then, just as swiftly, she straightened, her tone cool and measured. "I was preserving it," she said, almost casually. "You wouldn't understand the responsibility that comes with safeguarding something so delicate." Anne's eyes narrowed. "Safeguarding?" Her voice trembled, not from fear, but from fury barely contained. "Is that what you call forging documents and swapping royal artifacts under a false authorization?" Camilla finally turned. Her expression was perfectly composed, the years of royal performance etched into her face like a mask. "You're overreacting," she said smoothly. "Everything was done to protect the legacy of the late queen. If a few signatures were misplaced, that's hardly a crime." Anne stepped closer. The distance between them shrank to a few feet. "Spare me the rehearsed lines, Camilla." She reached into her coat and unfolded a set of aged papers. "These are the original archives from the royal collection. Every gem, every engraving, every signature, cataloged by hand. And this," she held up a copy, "is the version approved by your so-called Restoration Committee. The diamond placements don't match. Even the hallmark beneath the crest has been recut." Camilla's face paled. For the first time, her carefully built composure faltered. She glanced toward the crown resting on the table. The faint glimmer of guilt flickered in her eyes. Anne continued, her tone steady but deadly calm. "You didn't just alter a symbol, Camilla. You desecrated something sacred. This crown was designed for Catherine, in honor of the Queen's final wish, and you replaced it with a counterfeit that serves only your vanity." Camilla's hands trembled slightly as she reached for a glass of water. "Watch your words. "Anne," she warned, "you're treading dangerously close to treason." Anne let out a short, bitter laugh. "Treason? Don't insult my loyalty. I served this family before you ever set foot in Buckingham Palace. I stood beside my mother when she carried the weight of the crown alone. And now I watch you parading around as if you've earned her throne, while stealing what's left of her legacy." The words struck like lightning. Camilla's eyes flared. She slammed the glass onto the table. "You think you're the only one who cared for Elizabeth? Don't pretend righteousness. And you hated her rules as much as I did. You just didn't have the courage to challenge them." Anne stepped even closer until their eyes met, unblinking. "There's a difference between challenging and corrupting, between courage and deceit. You've crossed that line." For a long moment, neither moved. The only sound was the ticking of an old clock on the mantel, counting every heavy second. Camilla turned away, gripping the back of a chair for balance. Her voice lowered, almost trembling now. "You have no idea what I've endured. Do you think the crown came easily to me? I was humiliated, hated, blamed for things beyond repair. I fought for acceptance. I earned it with my place." Anne's gaze softened, but only slightly. "And in earning it, you've lost what little honor was left." Camilla spun around. "Honor doesn't feed the wolves. Anne, you think they'd let me keep the throne if I showed weakness? You think Charles could protect me if the truth came out?" Her voice cracked with desperation. "Sometimes you have to play the game to survive." Anne shook her head. "This isn't survival. It's greed wrapped in silk." She turned her eyes to the crown again, the diamonds glimmering coldly under the chandelier. "Tell me, Camilla, what did you trade the real one for?" Silence. Camilla's lips parted, but no words came. Her eyes darted toward the window, as though calculating an escape that didn't exist. Anne took a slow breath, realizing the depth of what she'd uncovered. "There's someone else involved, isn't there?" Anne's tone dropped to a whisper. "You couldn't have done this alone." Camilla's jaw tightened. She said nothing. Anne folded the documents back into her coat. "I'll find out who helped you, and when I do, there won't be enough royal protocol in the world to protect you." Camilla's voice trembled as she tried to regain control. "You wouldn't dare expose this. The family would crumble." Anne turned to leave, her hand on the doorframe. Then maybe it's time it did. The chandelier flickered again. Outside, thunder rolled over Wiltshire, shaking the old walls of Raymill House. Camilla stood motionless, her hand still resting on the counterfeit crown, the weight of her deception pressing down like lead. As Anne's footsteps faded into the night, Camilla whispered into the silence, as if confessing to the ghosts in the room. "You think you've seen the truth, Anne, but you haven't even begun." A storm cracked open the sky, lightning flashing through the window, illuminating the jewels for a single, haunting second. And in that flash, the realization struck Anne as she stepped into the rain. Perhaps the crown wasn't the only thing Camilla had replaced. Behind this exchange, Anne thought grimly, there must be something far darker. The next morning, tension still lingered in the air of St. James's Palace. The corridors were unusually quiet, though whispers about the missing royal crown traveled quickly from servant to servant. No one dared to mention Camilla's name aloud, but everyone knew who they were thinking of. Camilla arrived early, dressed more simply than usual, wearing only a pair of old pearl earrings. She requested to see Princess Anne in the small west drawing room, the same place where they had once shared tea with Queen Elizabeth years ago. The room was still and heavy with memory, broken only by the steady tick of an antique clock. When Anne entered, her presence filled the space. She didn't offer a greeting. Her silence was sharper than words. Camilla drew a deep breath and began, her voice trembling slightly. "Anne, I didn't come here to argue. I just wanted to tell the truth. I only wanted that crown kept out of sight. Catherine doesn't understand its true worth. Not like I do." Anne's expression didn't change. Her hand rested on the back of a chair, her eyes fixed on Camilla with icy composure. Then, in a tone as cold as glass, she replied, "No one has the right to decide the fate of the Queen's symbols, least of all someone who entered this family through the back door." The words hit like a blade. Camilla flinched. She opened her mouth to defend herself, but Anne's stare silenced her completely. Anne stepped closer, lowering her voice, each word cutting deeper. "You think it's just jewelry? That crown is a legacy, a sacred trust. When you touched it, for whatever reason, you crossed a line even my mother never allowed anyone to cross." Camilla's shoulders sagged, her voice breaking. I just wanted to belong. I've been compared, hated, treated like an intruder for years. Between Charles and Diana, between the public and this family, I thought, if I held on to something of the Queen's, maybe I'd finally be part of it. Anne stared at her for a long moment. The anger in her eyes faded, replaced by something colder: disappointment. "Belonging doesn't come from possession," Anne said, her tone low but firm. "The Queen trusted Catherine because she understands duty, not vanity. You wanted that crown not out of love, Camilla, but because it was proof of something you've never earned." Camilla said nothing. The sunlight from the tall window fell across her face, revealing the deep lines, the exhaustion, the fear. For the first time, she looked less like a queen and more like a woman who'd spent her whole life fighting shadows that would never love her back. Anne turned to leave. Her footsteps echoed across the marble floor. Camilla sat frozen, her hands trembling in her lap. Somewhere deep inside, she knew what Anne's silence meant. After this conversation, things would never be the same. What had begun as a small act of secrecy had become something much darker. An offense not just against Catherine, but against the honor of the crown itself. When the truth finally surfaced, Anne would understand that this wasn't just selfishness. It was betrayal. A betrayal of everything the royal family was meant to stand for. By the following evening, the storm Anne had tried to contain could no longer be hidden. She entered Buckingham Palace with a sealed folder in her hands. The results of the royal jeweler's independent assessment. The corridors, lined with portraits of monarchs long gone, seemed to watch as she walked toward her brother's private study. King Charles looked up when she entered. His expression softened, as it always did with Anne, but when she placed the folder on his desk and said quietly, "You need to see this," something in her tone froze him. For several minutes, there was only the sound of rustling paper and the ticking of the clock on the mantel. Charles's eyes moved over the jeweler's notes, the photographs, the signatures. Finally, he looked up, pale, shaken, and silent. "It's true," Anne said. "The crown Catherine wore at the Jubilee wasn't the original. It was swapped out." Charles closed the folder slowly. For the first time in a long while, he had no words. The truth hit him harder than he'd expected. When William was summoned, he didn't hide his anger. His voice echoed through the chamber, sharp and furious. "So she thought she could borrow my wife's crown? That crown belonged to the Queen, to the nation, not to her." Anne tried to calm him, but he went on, pacing across the floor. "From now on," William said, his tone like steel, "she doesn't go near the royal vault. Not one step." Charles didn't object. He simply nodded, his silence speaking volumes. By the next morning, the story had slipped beyond palace walls. Someone had talked, a whisper to a friend, a hint to a reporter. And suddenly the tabloids were alive with speculation. Headlines screamed of a secret switch, a royal betrayal, Camilla's crown scandal. Security cameras captured the discreet return of the real crown to Buckingham under the cover of night. The footage, though never made public, would later be described by one staff member as the most haunting thing I've ever seen. The box carried by gloved hands, the faint reflection of diamonds flickering under dim palace light. Inside the family, the atmosphere turned icy. Conversations halted when Camilla entered a room. Even Charles, torn between duty and loyalty, could barely meet her eyes. And yet, Through the tension and shame, one truth became impossible to deny. What began as a quiet secret at Mill House had grown into an earthquake that shook the very foundation of the British monarchy. The scandal left scars that no apology could heal. Within Buckingham's gilded halls, trust had become a fragile thing, delicate, breakable, forever changed. Camilla withdrew from public life for weeks, her once confident smile replaced by silence. Charles, caught between the crown and his conscience, faced the quiet humiliation of a king betrayed not by his enemies, but by his own household. Anne Fionn, ever the voice of duty, carried herself with the same calm resolve. Yet deep down she knew this was not victory, it was sorrow. And as for William and Catherine, their unity in the aftermath only strengthened the image of a new, steadier monarchy. In the end, the stolen crown was returned to its rightful place, but the trust it symbolized would take far longer to restore. Some wounds, after all, shine brighter than any diamond.